Hello, my name is Dr. Jyme Nichols. I am the Director of Nutrition for Bluebonnet Feeds, and today I am going to visit with you just a bit about the things that go into manufacturing horse feeds. So making feed for horses just isn't really quite as simple as it sounds. It is both a science and an art. You have to not only be able to please the nutritional needs of the horse, but you actually also have to consider the sensory needs of the horse owner. Okay, so when horse owners are deciding what to feed their horse, there's a lot of things that they're considering. There's a lot of things going through their minds besides just that nutritional content that's guaranteed on that feed tag. I mean, horse owners are considering, the visual appearance, they're considering smell, their horse's taste preferences, and then even the ease of feeding for themselves. So an equine feed manufacturer has to consider all of these things if they want to build an excellent reputation in the horse world. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek into the world of equine feed manufacturing. While it's still early in the presentation and I have your full attention, let's get some of the boring stuff out of the way. So let's talk regulations. Anyone who manufactures and sells feed in the United States is going to be subject to regulation by the FDA and then also by individual state agriculture agencies. So, a company is going to need to have what we call good manufacturing practices in place, and they're going to have to follow all safety protocols. And when I say safety, I'm talking about, safe feed for the horse and a safe work environment for everyone that's working at the mill to produce that feed. Now, when it comes to tag requirements, the FDA and the state regulatory agencies are generally going to adopt the rules and regulations that are set forth by AAFCO. That stands for the American Association of Feed Control Officials. So most people don't realize this, but there's actually, there are certain words that can and cannot be used on feed tags. There are certain ways to describe ingredients. There's a specific order in which the feed tag actually has to be written. And there are also certain nutrients that have to be listed on a feed tag if that feed is intended for horses. So let's get into the feed tags just a little bit. I'm going to take a look here at an equine feed tag and all of the components that must be included. Now, this is a lot of information on one screen, so I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I'm going to take it step by step. So first and foremost, a tag is going to need to have the name of the product that it is identifying. Followed by that, you're going to see the purpose statement. So in this situation, the product is called Intensify OmegaForce, and the purpose statement says that it is a premium quality pelleted feed that provides maximum nutrition to horses in all life stages using a low feeding rate. Now, every feed tag must have then specific feeding directions for all classes that were listed in the purpose statement. So in this situation, the purpose statement said that it was designed for horses in all life stages. So in the feeding directions, you're going to see those different stages. So you have adult maintenance, you have performance and the 3 different stages of performance, and then you have all of your breeding and growing horses. Now, after that, you're going to see all of the nutrients that the manufacturer is willing to guarantee, and this is going to be listed under the guaranteed analysis section. Now, the length of guarantee, meaning the number of different nutrients that a manufacturer guarantees, is going to vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, and it can also vary from feed to feed depending on how much that manufacturer wants to guarantee for the particular product. Now, most horse feeds that contain added copper are going to show a caution statement that is going to be warning people that that feed should not be fed to sheep or copper sensitive animals. And this is because horses have actually a very high copper requirement when you compare it to other species. And in fact, it's so high that it can actually be toxic to some animals if they were to eat this feed. Now, that's one reason that you should always look at labels and only feed a product if it is labeled for the intended animal, okay? Now, ingredients is the next thing that you'll see. So ingredients will be listed in what is called order of predominance. Basically, that means that the first ingredient listed is going to be included in the largest amount, and the last ingredient listed is going to be included in the smallest amount. Now, moving down to the bottom left side of the tag, you'll be able to find the manufacturer's information, such as the tag that's printed here. In the middle, you'll be able to find the bag weight. And then on many tags, you're also going to be able to see the lot tracing numbers. Okay, so lot tracing can sometimes, it'll either be printed on the bag, or it can also sometimes be printed on the bag. So either the bag or the tag. But that information is basically what the manufacturer is going to use in order to investigate anything that they might need to investigate for that particular feed, whether that might be a complaint from a customer or a violation from a state or federal agency. You know, there's a lot of different reasons that a company or a manufacturer would want to be able to fully investigate a feed. Now, at Bluebonnet Feeds, for example, every bag that goes into a bag of feed can actually be traced back to the original supplier through this lot tracing system. Okay, so that lot number is going to provide information that can help us determine the exact sequence or order in which that feed was manufactured or produced. It's also going to help us identify everyone who would have come into contact with that feed from the very beginning of manufacture all the way to through the time that it was delivered onto the dock of the feed store, where a horse owner would actually then be able to purchase it. Now, before we move on completely from tag regulations, there's something I want to point out, and this is under the ingredient listing section. So a manufacturer actually has a choice in how they want to list their ingredients. So one way to list ingredients is to use collective terminology, which means you're going to see the major ingredients listed on the tag with terms such as processed grain byproducts, grain products, roughage products, forage products, plant protein products, etc. Now, this method is really useful because it allows a company to least cost formulate their feeds. So for example, AAFCO, the agency that influences the feed tag regulations, they put out a list of all of the ingredients that can be classified under each of these collective terms. So let's take grain products, for example. Now that could be, according to AAFCO's list, that could be corn, oats, wheat, rice, milo, or any of those other cereal grains that are listed under that grain products category. Now, as long as the nutritionist includes at least one of those ingredients, okay, the tag is going to contain the term grain products. Now, let's say that the nutritionist was using a really large amount of, let's say, oats in the formula. But the commodity market changed, and all of a sudden corn is really cheap and oats are pretty pricey. Well, if a company uses collective terminology, they can quickly and easily change that formula in order to take advantage of the lower cost of those ingredients. That's why it's called least cost formulation. And that particular method of formulation really is the gold standard when it comes to formulating for cattle diets or other production livestock. However, some equine manufacturers believe that horses have a digestive tract that's just a little too sensitive to tolerate these potentially dramatic shifts in formulation. Or maybe they have a customer base who wants to know exactly what's going into the feed that they're giving their horse. So the second option then for ingredient listing is to use what is called a true name listing, or the true names of the ingredients on that feed tag. So true name listings are exactly how they sound. They basically provide full transparency around what ingredient is going into the feed and in what ratio it is to the other ingredients. So for example, the ingredient included in the largest amount in this particular true name listing is dehydrated alfalfa meal. Now, it's not legal to just say alfalfa. Okay, so AAFCO has a very strict set of requirements that must be followed when it comes to identifying the type of ingredient on the tag. So manufacturers that use true name labeling, they have to adhere to those specific rules that are set forth. Now, when it comes to choosing which option, so if you're a horse owner and you're trying to decide whether you want to go with an equine manufacturer that chooses collective terminology versus true name terminology, there really is no right or wrong. It all comes down to, basically that manufacturer is making a choice of what they can realistically handle when it comes to ensuring nutrient consistency in the raw ingredients, and then also the price that they're willing to sell their feed for. So if their customer base demands a low cost feed, then they're most likely going to be forced into using collective terminology. Now, if a manufacturer's customer base demands consistency and transparency, then they're most likely going to be forced to use true name ingredient listings. Now, I think that every horse owner should be aware of ionophores and the danger that they pose to your horse. Now, an ionophore is a drug that is commonly used in livestock species as it's basically a coccidiostat, or it's used as a growth stimulant. So it's really commonly used in cattle feeds and also in poultry feeds. But the kicker here is horses are incredibly sensitive to this type of drug, and it can be lethal at very small levels if a horse were to ingest any kind of feed that would contain any of these ionophores. So the most dangerous situation is when horse feeds are manufactured in mills that use those drugs. So if the mill has the drug on site, there is always going to be a chance for accidental contamination of those horse feeds. So this is why some equine feed manufacturers are going to declare their facilities to be ionophore free rather than just having safety protocols in place. So when a manufacturer chooses to be ionophore free, it means that they will not allow any feed for any species to be produced with those drugs. And that ultimately is going to eliminate all risk of that horse feed becoming contaminated. Now let's dive a little bit into feed forms, okay? So there are 4 different forms of feed that I'm gonna talk about: pelleted, textured, extruded, and cubes. So let's start with pellets. They're probably one of the most common. In fact, pelleted feeds are really, they're gaining more and more in popularity. I believe that this is because the trust levels have began to improve between equine feed manufacturers and horse owners. So I've heard it a million times that people used to, not like to feed pelleted feeds because they didn't know what was in it, or they thought that the manufacturer was just putting, quote, floor sweepings into that feed and turning it into a pellet. Now, while that might have been true at some point, or for some feed manufacturers, today that's just not the case. If you are purchasing from a reputable equine feed company that has good manufacturing practices in place, that they are taking all of the steps and the protocols to make sure that they are producing the highest quality feed that they can for you. And that does not include sweeping up everything that's on the floor and throwing it into the mix, okay? So pellets are actually quite desirable because they allow nutritionists to use ingredients that are highly nutritious, but they might otherwise be really unpalatable to a horse, meaning they're really good for a horse, but they might not want to eat them. Kind of like if you were trying to get your little kid to eat vegetables at every meal. They're really good for them, but if you can't get that kid to eat the vegetable, they're not going to get that nutrition. So pelleted feeds are basically, how you make them is you take all of the ingredients and you mix them together into what is called a meal, basically. And so what that means is all of the ingredients are essentially ground up into a fine, almost kind of powdery meal, so that everything is really consistent and the same particle size. And then we get a really good mix on that. So we've got a homogeneous, or a very consistent blend of all of the ingredients across the entire batch. Now that meal, or that mash, is then exposed to steam and then compression as it is pushed through a large metal die. And basically that die has really small holes that have a diameter of anywhere from 1/4 of an inch to a half of an inch. When we're talking about pelleted feeds, that's kind of our range. Now the pellets, as they're getting pushed through that die, are then cut to a specific length. And that length is going to vary depending on the feed, depending on the manufacturer. But in general, most horse pellets are going to be between 1/4 of an inch to 1 inch long. Um, Now, of course, the major benefit of a pelleted feed is going to be that consistency from feeding to feeding, since those ingredients were mixed really well to begin with, and then, essentially, it's almost like they're frozen in the form of a pellet. They can't sift, they can't shift, they can't blow away during feeding time, or during storage. If maybe you happen to be buying in really large volumes and using a bulk bin, there's not going to be any shifting or sifting or separating of those ingredients. Now, the next form we're going to talk about is textured. So textured feeds can come as dry blends or wet blends. A wet blend basically means that it's going to have a coating of molasses, and those feeds are typically called sweet feeds. A dry blend is going to look a little bit more like this picture. It's not going to contain that molasses coating. Now, a feed gets the name textured when the ingredients have varying sizes. So for example, a feed might have, corn, oats, and pellets like what you see in this picture. But, a textured feed could also consist of, say, pellets and beet pulp shreds, okay? So this would still also be classified as a textured feed, but it would not contain the oats or the corn like you would see in a typical cob or corn oat barley sweet feed mix. Textured feeds are going to be really beneficial or ideal because they have a desirable taste for the horse. Okay, so there are very few horses that will turn away a textured feed. And then they also have a really pleasing visual appearance. So I get a lot of feedback from horse owners that they really like to feed a textured feed because it just looks pretty and they can see all of those ingredients in there freely. Now the next feed form is extruded. So extruded feeds are going to be more commonly found in the pet food industry, where you're dealing with ingredients like corn or meat that needs to be processed into a kibble for dogs or cats. However, it is really starting to creep in and gain more popularity in the world of equine manufacturing as well. So extrusion is basically a pressure cooking method where the ground up ingredients, they're exposed to steam and moisture and heat. And the cooking process basically is going to help break down, it's going to start that breakdown process of starch and different protein bonds. In fact, it's almost like that digestion has started before it even gets into the horse's mouth. And so it allows for a quicker digestion in the small intestine, and it provides a little bit better access for those enzymes to get into that feed and get it broken down more quickly. Now, this can be really helpful for senior horses who are losing their ability to digest feed very well. And it's also really good for horses that maybe have poor teeth condition, or maybe they're missing some teeth. And then it can also be helpful for horses that are overcoming, major surgeries, so colic surgery, or horses that just in general have a really sensitive digestive tract. Now the next feed form, and the last one that we're going to discuss, is cubes. So cubes are going to be the largest in size, and much like the pelleted feeds, the ingredients are going to be mixed into a mash or a meal, and then they're going to be pushed through that die to create very large pellets that are generally called cubes, or you might hear them called cake. Particularly in the cattle industry, a lot of people will refer to these cubes as cake. Now, cubes have a diameter that's going to range in size. Typically, that's going to range from 3/4 of an inch, but it can go all the way up to 1.5 inches, and there are even some 2-inch cubes out there. Most of them are also going to be between 1 to 3 inches long. Okay. So cubes are really common in the cattle industry because you can feed them on the ground out on rangeland. But for that exact same reason, they can actually also be really convenient for horses. So let's say an operation has a really large group of horses, or maybe a broodmare band out on a very large pasture, and the owner wants the flexibility to be able to feed on the ground. Maybe they want to be able to change up their feeding location based on weather or where that herd is located that day. Cubes can come in really handy to make sure that those horses are getting the nutrition that they need on a daily basis, but you don't have to be locked into using feed troughs or feed buckets or feed pans. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes to manufacturing horse feed, we feel like we have a responsibility to provide the absolute best possible product because, let's face it, horses are just special, right? They ignite our passions, they drive our actions, they touch our emotions in a way that, very few other livestock animals can. So when you choose to be in the equine feed manufacturing business, you're providing so much more than nutrition in a 50-pound sack. You are fueling people's dreams. And to us, that is a huge responsibility that we take very, very seriously. Now, if you enjoyed this lesson and you wish to dive just a little bit deeper into learning more about equine nutrition, I encourage you to subscribe to my podcast. It is called Feed Room Chemist, an equine nutrition podcast, and you can find that anywhere that you like to listen to your podcasts. I want to thank you guys all for your attention today.